Hey guys, welcome to the Eczema Podcast. I absolutely loved this episode today because I interviewed someone who actually talks a lot about something that we might not think about that can actually affect our skin a lot. And a lot of us might not be thinking about this or even be aware of it, but have you ever thought about whether mold can be affecting your skin? I once saw a statistic that said 50% of homes in the US are affected by mold. And when I talked to my guest, he actually said that it's higher, around 80 to 90%. So that means that a lot of the homes, or the majority of homes, have mold and we don't even know it, or even homes that we did live in before and we've moved out that had mold, the mold spores can actually be in our clothes, or even when it goes into our body, we can still carry it when we move somewhere else. So my guest today gave a lot of great tips on practical things you can do in your house, how you can discover mold, how you can look for mold, how to prevent it in your home. So it's just a lot of great tips that I hope can help you today. I didn't actually think that mold affected a lot of my listeners, but when I asked on Instagram if people were affected by mold, I did a poll and 81% of my followers said that they have been affected by mold. So it's affecting a lot of people, and even more than I thought about. So I really hope that this episode can help you today. This episode is also sponsored by the Conqueror skincare products, so Conqueror Dry Skin Soothing Balm, and there's also a Conqueror body wash that's out now, and it uses, really high quality organic ingredients. It's very soothing and gentle ingredients like organic chamomile, biodynamic avocado oil, and it uses mechanical emulsification of the ingredients as well when they're being combined, so that the nutrients are not overprocessed or damaged as well in the raw materials, and no synthetic or petrochemical emulsifiers are used. So this really helps to preserve the original integrity of the plants that are used and the ingredients that are used as well. So I really hope that these products can help you. You can head to eczemaconquerors.com and use the discount code podcast10 to get 10% off, and that's podcast 10 with the number 10 to get 10% off. If you want to follow me on my healing journey, if you want to check out the before and after photos that I shared, and also just following me on my journey, the flare-ups that I've had, the stories that I share, and other helpful tips, you can follow me on Instagram, on Facebook at Eczema Conquerors, or head to eczemaconquerors.com for all my blogs and articles. And you can also join my free Facebook support group on Facebook, and it's just Eczema Conquerors, and you can look for the eczema support group. So I really hope that that can help you today. And thank you so much for listening, and I hope this episode can help you.
Hi, and welcome to the Eczema Podcast, where you'll learn tips, products, and natural eczema remedies from Abby, registered holistic nutritionist and founder of eczemaconquerors.com. Stay tuned as she invites experts in the field. Here's your host of the Eczema Podcast, Abby.
So hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Eczema Podcast. I have a really great guest on the show today. His name is Brian Carr. He is an indoor environmental consultant who specializes in mold. He's a mold expert. He's worked with a lot of hypersensitive individuals, and he's actually helped over 3,000 hypersensitive individuals nationwide. And he's also the co-founder of We Inspect, a national indoor environmental assessment company specializing in mold and biotoxin detection and the management for hypersensitive individuals. And you can also find him on Mold Masterclass on Instagram. And I just found him to be a wealth of knowledge. I found him on Instagram, and he was one of the few mold people who is sharing a lot of information about mold, especially because I had a lot of leaks in my house. So I became very I became very interested in this topic and how it can affect eczema as well. And then when I started talking to Brian, I discovered that he also started getting eczema on his face because he was inspecting so many houses with mold. So I'm just going to introduce Brian and let him share more about his story, what he's dealt with in terms of eczema and helping other people as well, and how he got into helping people with molds. So hi, Brian.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. So happy to have you on the show today.
Yeah, me too. I've been looking forward to it. We've had this on the books for like 2-3 months, so it's been on the calendar.
Yep, definitely. Yeah. So tell me your story. How did you get into becoming a mold expert, and what's your story? What's your own personal story with eczema?
Yeah, so the mold expert thing, it's a question I get a lot because it's not something that people think about doing. It's not like you're growing up expert and it's going to be great. But I was my father-in-law owns a company in Los Angeles called The Mold Guy. And he is one of the foremost experts in the country, on mold and how to detect and how to remediate and kind of all the things that I do now.
That's your father-in-law, the mold guy?
My father-in-law is the mold guy.
I've heard him on other podcasts, I think.
Yeah, he was on Dr. G's podcast a little bit ago, and he's been on a couple other ones. So.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know you were related.
Yeah, I work with him in Los Angeles locally, and then my company, We Inspect, is a nationally based company that uses live video streaming tech that allows me to basically work with people remotely without having to be there personally. So what we do is we send a consultant that we have trained out to whoever's property, wherever city they're located in, and he is outfitted with really high-end live video streaming tech. And I am with him in his ear the entire inspection. So I'm actually conducting the inspection if it's in Maine or New Hampshire that we've been from our home office. So We Inspect was really a way for us to be able to help people outside of our local market. So that's how that put together. But a long time ago, he asked me to come out and see if I was interested, and I was. And all of a sudden, I started getting involved in the medical conferences that focus on mold and its effect on human health. And I started traveling to those and making relationships with different practitioners across the country. And fast forward, several years later, now, one of the top resources that get referred out to really understand exposures and how to identify and how to remediate. So it's been a very rewarding path because you could see the benefit and the help that you're giving to people. And that's really that's what it's about at the end of the day. So.
Yeah, definitely. That's so cool. So then in terms of your own exposure, so you started getting eczema on your face because you were inspecting so many houses with mold?
Yeah. So, I haven't had it formally, but I definitely know that there's a correlation between when I do inspections in person towards when I start seeing outbreaks. And I've also been tested, which I haven't really shared with anybody, but I've been tested for mycotoxins in my own body. And I have 3 different mycotoxins that are actually present at high levels in my own body. And it's simply because of what I do. So I go into every house basically has a problem because they're being referred to me by their doctor who's seeing the signals first. So when I get a referral from a practitioner, basically every time you go into one of those houses, there are issues because they're already seeing it. So they're seeing it in their patient's clinical tests. And so when I go into these homes, I'm being exposed all the time. I definitely take a lot of precautions. I'm on a whole bunch of detox methods, which we could even talk about if you want to later. But I do everything that I can, but still it kind of builds up. And I start to notice, especially around where I wear my mask, because it covers up, kind of around here, I start to get breakouts, around kind of my nose and upper lips areas where my mask sits. And so it's something I've been looking into in things that I can do to kind of counteract a red light therapy device, which I'm kind of excited about. I'd love to hear your thoughts on those things.
Yeah, I actually just interviewed Juve, the red light therapy makers, about red light therapy in one of my last episodes, and it helps a lot of eczema apparently as well.
Yeah, that's what I was seeing and hearing. I was looking at the Juve and I was looking at the Platinum LED Biomax, and I ended up getting the second one just for the cost difference. But I'm really excited. It's showing up on Thursday, which Tuesday right now, so I got 2 days until it shows up. So
Amazing.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Cool. Let me know how it goes. I've been wanting to try it as well, so I think that's one thing I'll end up doing. But yeah, that's just so interesting that you recognize that the more houses that you see and that you test for mold, that you're also getting a reaction.
Yeah, I think it's fortunate that I have relationships with so many different doctors and that are functional doctors. I think it's really important because it's all about trying to understand what the root cause of a problem is. And I haven't gone to see a dermatologist because I kind of feel it's going to be put creams on your face and do certain things. And I just feel like because of what I'm doing, that there's more of a root issue to what's causing it. And I want to try to solve that piece. Obviously, I'm not going to stop going and helping people and kind of helping them in their homes. But if there are things that I can do physiologically to help kind of counteract that stuff, that's what I'm trying to focus on first.
Yeah, and I think that's great that you're tackling the root cause. So I guess one thing I'm curious about is that even though you're wearing a mask and a suit when you enter these houses, the mold still is able to irritate, like, I guess not just yours, but it must be like other people's skin as well. Like, especially even if you're wearing a mask, it must be so powerful that it can cause such an effect.
Well, there's a few things about how any sort of environmental contaminant is going to affect someone. And there's what's their genetic makeup first. So if genetically they're more predisposed to environmental contaminants to be able to trigger them. So people like with autoimmune disease, or there's a gene in the body called the HLA gene, which was figured out by Dr. Richie Shoemaker. 5% of the population has a mutation of the HLA gene that doesn't allow them to detox mold and mycotoxins and environmental contaminants properly. So if somebody just genetically has that, then their body has a more difficult time clearing it and it builds up. So that's definitely one big piece of the equation.
And sorry, you cut out a bit, but you said 25% of the population?
Yeah, that's what Dr. Shoemaker's research showed. I think it's 24, but it's somewhere right around there that shows that, yeah.
Yeah, I came across Dr. Shoemaker as well, and I know he has a lot of great information. So for people who are not sure if they do have mold in their house, like I know most people don't know if they do have mold, but I saw some statistic that said that 50% of homes in the States actually do have mold, and a lot of Airbnb and hotels do as well. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that number is really low. And the reason is that, when people think of water damage, they think of big floods or big water events, and that's what's reported. But there are so many other smaller water issues that occur in houses that either people don't know about, that are hidden, or that happen and they just think it's kind of a normal thing and we'll fix the source of the leak and it's fine. But the reality is if there's a water event and if mold grows as a result of that, which there's a good likelihood if it's not addressed quickly, then even if you fix the source of the leak, so let's say you had a roof leak, it impacted a ceiling in a bedroom, and you fixed the roof, but we did nothing with the ceiling, we did nothing with the attic that might have been above that, then there's likely still going to be a mold problem that's up in that space. So when we talk about that 50% number, and then you start thinking of all these other small little water things that happen, and then the older a house is, the more history accumulates, the more tiny things happen. I think that number, that 50% number, I personally 90, honestly.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, and it's a big challenge. And it's a big challenge to figure out where these things are happening. And it's a big challenge for people to be able to find homes that are not water damaged and don't have these types of environmental issues. And that's a big issue as well.
So how would people, like you mentioned, if there are pipes behind a wall that they can't see, how would they go about first looking into that and suspecting if there's mold there?
Well, a lot of times, people have the visible issue that comes from a leak like that, especially if they're not a hypersensitive person, because they may not be reacting to things. The people that I work with are more sensitive, so they're not kind of your mainstream population. They're the people that are being more affected by hidden things. And so those people might be showing, whether it's in their clinical tests where they're showing inflammatory markers, or they're actually testing for mold toxins in their body, sinus cultures that are showing mold growing in their noses and their sinuses. A lot of times when we go into those houses, a lot of visible mold growth anywhere, and that's really the big challenge. And that's where the way that the inspection is done is so important, because we have to be looking at historical areas of water intrusion, areas that maybe the client doesn't even know about. And then also understanding the history of the house. Has there been previous water events? What has been done as a result of those water events? And we then go in and basically try to identify if those areas have any hidden problems. So the majority of mold that is going to be present in not visible. And when you're dealing with people that have hypersensitivities or autoimmune issues that are triggering, and skin issues are obviously a part of that, and kind of the normal treatments are not working, it's really important to say, okay, is the environment part of what's contributing to this? And if that's the case, then we have a very in-depth inspection and testing protocol that we use to identify all that.
That's really interesting. I think I mentioned that my house had had a couple leaks. So what happened was that there were 2 toilet leaks, and then there was 1 roof leak. But people couldn't figure out. We had one plumber come in, but he couldn't figure out where the toilet, where the leaks were coming from. And then, so then the shower started leaking more, and then and then my ceiling started falling down a little bit, and then water trickled down. We had to have it opened up, and I think the leaks were happening for at least over a month. And we opened everything up, including the roof leaks. And I don't know how, but I feel so blessed that there was no mold behind there. And I've heard that mold can develop within 48 hours of a leak.
Some within 24.
Wow.
Depends on the mold type and what's there. Certain molds are very fast colonizers. They happen within maybe a day or 2. Other molds require more water and a longer amount of time. So if you've heard the phrase black toxic mold, which a lot of people have heard, that mold is particularly called Stachybotrys, is what they're referring to. That mold can take up to a couple weeks to grow.
Wow.
Water's there. So it just depends on the type and what's there. But yeah, it's something that can happen relatively quickly, for sure.
So was it actually a rare event that none of the 3 leaks that I had in my house turned into mold?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I don't know. It's hard without seeing it. I know that where there is water, mold can follow relatively quickly. So at the same time, one of my family members they live in a condo, and they just had a flood that basically started above their unit and came down into their unit. And it happened, and it took about maybe 5 or so days to get all the walls and ceilings opened up. And then we did testing in there, and there was actually no mold on anything at that point. And there was a good amount of water. However, there was bacteria and sewage byproducts in there. So there was a whole separate thing that he needs to deal with.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of listeners that probably don't think they have mold in their house, especially when I've worked with a lot of clients. I ask them if they have mold, and then, most of the time they say they don't. But then there's also the possibility that, they're not aware of it, or, aware of the issues that might be present. So how would someone start finding out if there is mold in their home?
So there's a couple things with this. I think the first thing is to really trust your doctor. And I know so many times that a doctor's working with their patient, and they say, listen, I think I think you have a mold issue. And the patient's like, no, our house doesn't have mold. We keep it clean. We do whatever. And the challenge is we don't see all of it. And so I would say the first step is, if your doctor is telling you that they're markers or whatever it is specifically that they're looking for that's telling them that there's mold, believe them. Because in my experience, every time that's happened, every single time, they were right. So that's the first thing. If you're working with a functional integrative doctor and they're doing that type of testing and it comes up, just put your faith in that doctor. You chose them because you trust them. So that's the first thing I would say.
Do regular doctors usually catch on to this, or ever suspect this?
From my experience, not really. So like your general practitioners and kind of mainstream medicine kind of people, they don't really look for it. It's more of the idea of take this pill, take this, cream, do whatever this stuff is, and we're basically going to fix the symptom. And fixing the symptom isn't going to fix the ongoing issue that's going on. Functional medicine doctors, integrative medicine doctors, they are actually trying to figure out inside of your body physiologically what is triggering whatever problem they're seeing. And furthermore, understanding that your physiological body is. So if they're seeing things that are going on that are making them think that you're getting, high inflammatory reactions or different markers that are tied to different molds or whatnot, then the understanding is like, okay, yes, mold can come through food. We understand that, but environment is actually a big bulk of the exposure that you get. So let's make sure we take that out of the equation and then kind of work it that way. So, it's a more in-depth process. It's not as easy as saying, let's take a pill. It takes some time to go through it. But I think, and obviously I'm not a doctor, I talk a lot about doctor things, but it's just because I have a lot of friends that are in the world. But this whole idea of chronic fill in the blank, chronic fatigue, chronic, whatever it is that you're dealing with that have been labeled some sort of chronic type of issue, it's labeled that because the doctors don't know what's causing it. So they just say, oh, it's this thing that just happens all the time. So we have to try to limit the pain or limit the reaction it's giving you. Chronic issues happen for a reason. And our bodies are not meant to have this chronic pain. And so why are they happening and how can we address it? And that's really a team effort between a medical practitioner that can look at it from that perspective for the body, and then an environmental person like me that could go in and understand that impact. And it's the teamwork of those two people that can help start putting people on the path back to health.
And I think that's really, really important. And I think it's so great what you told me your plans about what you're going to do with your podcast that you're going to start, and also just integrating like different practitioners. I think that'll help so many people.
Yeah, I have a big vision for the year to basically expand on my education platform. So I created Mold Masterclass 2 years ago, which is an online training course. Basically helps understand how to identify and then also how to remediate mold and mycotoxins in the home. And it's all built around the idea of hypersensitive and mold sensitive people. So that was kind of my first step into this education world that I'm here. My big plan is to really expand that platform. I have a lot of different things that we're going to be including. Can't talk too much about it now, but I'm really excited as it's going to roll out towards the end of the year. And it's going to be, in my opinion, from the way that I'm seeing it, it's going to be a big game changer for people that are looking to gather information and get direction on things. So I'm excited about it.
That's really, really great. I'm really excited about that and to hear it unfold.
Yeah.
So I guess people, could they start suspecting mold if, like, when they go on vacation or when they leave their house, they feel better?
I was on a tangent. There was more to this. Yes, thank you. So that's one big thing. So if you're not feeling a certain way and you're not 100%, and then you go on vacation or you leave your house for like a week and all of a sudden you're feeling a lot better, big red flag that there is an issue in your house that's causing problems. And a lot of times it's going to be water damage issues like mold or bacterial or different biotoxins. So that's a huge sign. Another thing is that if you're working with your doctor and you have these issues and they can't figure out what the problem is and they keep trying to give you meds and other things and nothing is working, odds are there's something else that's contributing to it. And so it may be a combination of some sort of kind of medical, but it could also be that in conjunction with environmental issues that are triggering that issue. So, I think those are three kind of big things. So the first one, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, if your doctor's telling you, then they're probably right. The second one is if you leave your home for a period of time and notice that you're feeling better, and then you come back and all of a sudden you're not feeling super hot again, huge red flag. And then, like I said, the third one is if you're kind of working with with different doctors and they can't figure it out, then the next step is say, okay, if we can't figure this out just from in my body, then what's in the environment here that could possibly be triggering this stuff? And I think those are three key checkpoints.
Yeah, I think that's important too. I've also been talking to a lot of people who mentioned that they went on vacation, they came back, and they felt a lot better. I think part of it could also be due to less stress and also having, more, just more fun maybe. For me, I recently went on vacation and I actually noticed it was my bedding that was causing me to not really heal. And I think that was really interesting because I noticed that the bedding I had since I was flaring up a lot. So I think for some people that could probably be an issue as well.
Yeah, there's so many things that can impact someone, and it's completely dependent on their genetics and their previous exposures, and then whatever their current health position may be at that point in time. Is their immune system more compromised right now for some reason versus something else? It's difficult, especially when you go down the idea of, okay, let's try to figure out where it's coming from versus just trying to do quick fixes. It ends up being elimination of not only diet, but also trying to test your environment, figure out your products that you're using. All that stuff can be a part of it. So it's a lot.
Yeah, definitely. It can be overwhelming for some people, but it's trial and error, I guess, just finding out, one step at a time what it could be.
It can, and you're totally right with it being overwhelming. And the thing that I try to tell people that I work with is, let's take this one step at a time. Let's not think that we're throwing everything out yet. Let's not think that we're changing up everything. Let's figure out if step one, whatever step one is, let's figure out if that's an issue, right? If it's an issue, let's address it. And then let's go to the next step if we need to, but you might not have to at that point. Maybe what you handled is enough. And I think a lot of times people, I do the same thing. It's just natural human nature to think ahead, like, oh, what's going to happen if I do this? Oh, we just figured this out. Next thing you know, you've created this future in your mind of this scenario that you're stressing you out, and that's actually a big part of, obviously, kind of mental well-being too, is to be able to try to eliminate that fear creation that hasn't even happened yet. And then that triggers your cortisol levels and all these other things that you do for stress and everything. And so, taking care of your body is a very holistic idea, but trying to manage that overwhelmed feeling by kind of focusing on the now and taking your baby, I think, is really important.
Definitely. So, if people see a little bit of mold in their house, can they take care of it on their own and just use, a mold spray to take care of it? Or at what point should they call a consultant like yourself to help with them?
So I would say I would never want anyone to take care of something themselves. And I know a lot of people try to be do-it-yourselfers and say, oh, we can handle this. We'll just surface clean this or whatever. A couple things on that. The first thing is, if you're seeing mold somewhere, mold is kind of like an iceberg. So the Titanic didn't see the giant thing underwater. They barely saw the tip of it, ran into it, and then the giant thing underwater destroyed the whole ship, right? And that's kind of the same concept with mold. If you're seeing the tip of it, there's a possibility that there's a lot bigger issue that's hidden somewhere. And so the cleaning something is that you're not really addressing the hidden portion of it. It's all still there. And any mold behind walls or ceilings 100% impacts the living space. It's not like trapped back there. And so if you're only trying to clean the very surface of it, you're missing out on potentially a lot of other issue that's back there. The second issue is that, if you do try to, let's say, remove a little bit of drywall or whatever it is that someone's going to try to do on their own, the other big contaminates the home and your contents and belongings very easily. So when you create a disturbance, like cutting out drywall or removing anything like that, it's kind of creating like a microscopic explosion of what's going on back there. And all that stuff bursts out into the space and moves around your house. It gets caught up in the heating and air conditioning system. Now it's getting transferred all over the whole home, and it could even impact your heating and air conditioning system. So it's really important that remediation is done under proper containment protocols, which is a fancy word of saying, let's seal all this stuff up to make sure that it does. And so even things that don't look that big can create a larger contamination issue if they're not handled in the appropriate manner. So I always think that you need to have proper remediation, licensed remediators come in. But even the step before that, have someone like us come in who's an inspector who can actually try to figure out the extent of the problem. So remediators most remediators view these projects as construction projects. So they're coming in, they're removing stuff, they're doing some cleaning, and they're really doing inspection to figure out how far has the water traveled. Is there mold that might be hidden somewhere else in an adjacent wall, or maybe in the room down below? Has it leaked through to the room down below? So what we do is that we try to figure out the source point of where it's located, and then also how is that spread and moved throughout the house potentially, and create a plan that's encompassing of all of that so we don't miss anything. And that's a big piece too.
So does that mean that if someone has a leak in the house, it would be a good idea to maybe contact one of you guys to
Yeah, and even if it's not us, but to have that and understand, is it a situation where we caught it fast enough and we got it dried out and there's no mold that grew here, or is it a bigger problem and do we need to do more cleaning and more removal and remediation to understand that? Anytime that there's a historical water event, mold needs to be a top priority, and because it can so easily form, and then the health reactions that occur from that can be very significant and manifest in many different ways for people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really important as well. During my research on mold, I also read that mold can travel through plastic and even walls. So it's it's just so potent. It can travel through anything. So even if you close the door, it could still travel through it.
100%. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that the fine particles that are kind of broken off of these mold colonies, they're incredibly small. So they pass through drywall. So these, wall looks solid to us, but the reality is that it's a lot of tightly wound, that put it together. These particles are so small that they can work through that. And when it comes to our bodies have essentially a natural filtration process to filter out all the stuff that we breathe. Starts in your nose, works down, towards your lungs, and the idea is to protect your lungs and ultimately your blood from whatever you're breathing. Well, these fine particles are much smaller than what our body's filtration can handle. So they can go all the way down without being held up, get into your lungs, and then actually work into the blood and then move through the body that way. So this stuff travels. It travels easily. The air currents, the air pressure in your house, which is very normal, is going to move it everywhere just naturally. And then if you have a heating air conditioning system, that's also going to pick it up and move it around. So there's a lot of ways for it to travel. So it's definitely something that needs to be taken seriously when you understand the impact and how it's going to move.
When I was part of a lot of Facebook groups, I would read the forums just like every day. And, it was kind of scary in a way because some people had to change all their, like the heating cooling system. And they said they had to spend like $50,000 just to change the whole, all their, the whole, all the air ducts and stuff as well. So that's kind of crazy if that happens.
It is. And sometimes that has to happen. Conditioning systems and ductwork separately from the house, so we can understand how the system has been impacted versus what's going on in the house. Sometimes they do need to be removed. Other times, they might be able to be cleaned. Also, different in larger homes, you have multiple air conditioning systems. So one might service, let's say, the basement and like the downstairs. Another one services the upstairs. If you had a waterproofing issue, let's say, that impacted your basement that caused a lot of problems, and then everything that's going on in the house, then the system that's closer to down there is likely to be more heavily impacted. And maybe the system that's servicing the upstairs hasn't really been hit that hard. And if that's the case, maybe you can clean it. So we actually test each system separately so we can understand the full view of what's impacted, what's not impacted. Because you're right, to replace an HVAC system is very expensive. So we want to be able to have enough data that we can share that says, yes, we think that's needed, or we think that maybe we can get by and try to clean it, maybe retest it after and take another look at it and see what's there.
And I think that's really important. And what about attics? Because I actually found a lot of mold in my attic when I had some things fixed in it. So I was told that the mold in the attic actually isn't harmful because it's the type of mold it is. But when I was reading up on it, I saw that it can cause allergies and asthma. And I noticed that the day after they cleaned the mold out, I was finding it hard to breathe in the room. So I would love to know your thoughts on attic mold, because the guy that I also talked to said that it's very common to have mold in the attic.
Yep.
Especially because it doesn't have very good ventilation a lot of times.
Yeah, so there's a few things with this. So first, there's no way to know what mold is in an attic unless you test it. So the mold that they're talking about is called ophiostoma. It's what people kind of consider a wood fungus, and because of that, they don't think that it's a big issue. The challenge is that mold looks like a bunch of other mold types too. So, you could be the best inspector that ever was, but you don't have microscopes for eyes, and there's no way that you can know what that mold is unless it gets tested. And I will tell you, I test it every time. I do a composite sample in an attic. If I see it, there's mold everywhere. I test it every single time, because you can't make that assumption. And a lot of times it's not that mold. A lot of times it's aspergillus, or it's penicillium, or it's something else that's growing. Is that attic mold is not a thing. Like, mold is mold, and it can grow anywhere. It just needs the right environment. So that's the first thing with it. Second thing, mold is pretty common in attics. A lot of that is due to what you were saying about ventilation, but the reason that the ventilation is an issue is because the natural airflow in a house throughout a majority of the year is going to push air from the bottom of the house upward to the top of the house. The top of the house is your attic, and it's going to settle up there. So if you have if you have mold issues inside the living spaces of your house, it's going to get moved upward, right? And then it's going to settle up there. Second, if there are any sort of humidity or moisture issues in your house, it is also going to get moved up, and it's going to get pushed up in there. So you can actually create an environment from a humidity perspective that's going to allow mold to grow. And then the actual pressure of the building that's funneling mold and contaminants up there is going to create more of an issue up there. So you can actually start having mold grow up there because of that. The other thing to keep in mind is that standard building practices don't protect the wood before it is used to build a house. And then even while you're building a house, wood gets wet. Like, they're not covering the houses and protecting the houses. A lot of times, what's happening in the attic is not because some sort of issue occurred in the attic necessarily. It's because the wood that they used to build the house was already contaminated when they brought it in. So that's another thing that happens too. But regardless of why it's happening, the reality is that anything that's occurring in your attic from a mold growth perspective is going to circulate throughout the house and impact you. So the airflow in a house is a contiguous system. Sometimes it moves more upwards, sometimes it moves more downwards. When you turn on an air conditioning system, it creates a negative pressure that pulls air toward the system. So it's going to pull from up and down into the main living spaces. Of air pressure issues that happen continuously throughout the house. That means anything that's connected to the living space, which includes your attic, your crawl space, your basement, your garage, if they have shared walls, anything that's going on in those spaces will be impacting the actual occupied living space. So making sure that those areas are handled, and don't have issues going on is really important.
So what happens if, after they have discovered there's mold and then they try to clean it up? How would people get rid of the mold in the house? So for example, is there like an air filter you recommend, or like bathroom exhaust fans to get the mold out? Or
Yeah, it depends on the level of what we're dealing with. There's a cleaning process that you can do throughout the house that's meant to grab these smaller particles that are floating in the air and extract them out of the house. That's a big piece of it. Source removal is always the approach to get rid of this stuff. It's not spraying it with something and trying to kill it and saying, I fogged the house, everything is fine. That stuff doesn't work. You actually have to remove the issue. The problem with a cross-contaminated house is that it's not that the issue is growing in the air, it's that it's in the air because there was a source somewhere else that moved it through the house. So what we need to do is grab the particles that are floating in the air, grab them, pull them down to the surfaces, and then wipe the surfaces and get rid of them. And so there are processes that could incorporate fogging as part of that to get these tiny particles attached to it that makes it heavier and brings it down to the surface. And then we can then wipe it, or the remediator can wipe it away, and you can extract that out. That's the first step, really, if you're trying to do a deeper clean. If your issue isn't that significant and you're just trying to kind of maintain, then yes, definitely air filtration devices can be used. There are some high, kind of like high level ones that are meant for more, sensitive people and medical applications. That would be the ones that make the most sense, but they can help filter a lot of these small particles out of the space too.
That's great to hear. I think you did a story on this before I saw, and I think, was it Air Doctor that you recommended as an air filter?
It was the iAdapt Air from Air Oasis was the one that I did. And so the reason I like it, it has a couple different functionalities to it. So it's a filter, which a lot of them are. And when I mean filter, basically what's happening is that you have your unit and it's sucking air into the unit, and then it has filtration built in that's pulling out small particles. So that's the first step. And we're trying to get particles that are smaller than the size of mold. So a HEPA filter, which are cheaper filters you can buy, that's about the size of a mold spore, right? So that's the standard of what HEPA filtration is. What we want to do is filter much smaller than that, because the particles that break off of the mold colonies are much smaller than the spores themselves. So we need to filter that stuff out, because those are the particles that I mentioned earlier that bypass our body much more easily. So that's really what we're concerned with. That Air Oasis iAdapt Air filters down to 0.007 microns. So you think 0.3 to 0.007 is a very big difference in magnitude of the size of a particle. So that's the first step, is to be able to filter something out from the particulate perspective. The other thing I like that unit does is that it releases ions out into the living space too, that are oppositely charged from biological contaminants, meaning they create like a magnetic effect to like mold and bacteria, and then they break them down at the point where they attach to them. So if you imagine your unit, it's sucking air in and filtering when it hits in, but it's also sending out all these invisible little ions that are traveling throughout the room. And then if, let's say you're in an office and there's some mold on your desk, well, these ions are going to float around, they're going to see the desk, and they're going to go to it, and they're going to break it down because they have that opposite magnetic effect. So that's why I like that unit, because it kind of incorporates both of those. If you have to choose one function over the other, filtration is definitely the function that's most important. But I like that unit because it added that other component in there, and it's nice to have.
That's great. Because I saw a lot of people recommend Air Doctor as well, but it's good to know that you also have yours. So maybe afterwards you can send me a link and I'll include it in the description for people to find it.
Yeah, definitely. We actually created an entire website specifically around technology for mold and environmental issues. It's moldairpurifiers.com. But we basically talked about our entire philosophy on how they should be, the different technologies should be combined together, how you build like an HVAC system along with portable units in a house to create a really holistic approach to air treatment. So yeah, I'll definitely send you stuff on that, but there's a lot of information there.
That would be great. So I want to talk about the causes of mold. So I know it's not just water leakage, but I saw that the other cause of mold can actually be if your house has a humidity over 55%.
Yes. So water and moisture is the cause, but it's not necessarily like a big water event. So humidity is water. Humidity is moisture. It's just a version of it. So there are certain mold types that can grow just by having humidity reach 55, 60%, somewhere in that threshold. That's why when we were talking about the attic a minute ago, if you have, sorry about that. If you have, let's say, an exhaust fan from a bathroom that is releasing directly into your attic, which is a big no-no. They should be releasing out of the roof and out of the house. But if for some reason they're releasing into the attic, you're pumping essentially humid shower air into the attic because you're upping that humidity. So the things to think about are, have there been any historic leaks that have happened in your house? There's a chance that there's mold issues there. And when we say leaks, we don't mean big floods. I mean, obviously that's more of an obvious issue. But a lot of times I'll talk to people and I'll look under their like kitchen sink, for example, or their bathroom sink. And I'll be like, and I'll show them like, hey, there's signs of water damage in here. This is an area that's suspect. We want to test this. They're like, oh yeah, that sink is leaking. not something that they think to tell you up front about the history of the house, because we always want to understand the history. It's those things that we need, these smaller leaks that we just don't inherently think are a problem actually can be, all the way to the point that you mentioned, where if we're just getting humidity issues. So if you're taking really long hot showers in a room that doesn't have an exhaust fan, then you're really pumping up the humidity in that space, and you can be creating problems that start growing throughout an entire bathroom that way.
So that's really important. Now, what happens if like a house, there's like big houses with like 3 stories? How would you work to decrease the humidity in like such a, big house, and if like they have 3 stories and also basement?
Yeah, well, part of it depends on what country or what part of the country you live in as well. So certain parts of the country are more humid than other parts of the country. And in certain parts of the country, you outside air because it might be drier. In other parts of the country, because it's very damp and humid outside, you actually don't want to be introducing as much outside air. And you need to have more dehumidification, processes in place inside the house to counteract the outside. So it really depends on where you are and how the air flows and to manage that. And there's, obviously in different parts of the country, there's going to be different experts that specialize in their climate and understand how to look at that. But it's a big thing. So like in Florida, you're not wanting to necessarily pump in a bunch of external air into the house because you're just going to be increasing the humidity. Whereas if you're from Vegas, which is where I'm from, that's not an issue at all, right? So it's the other way around. Let's open the windows. Let's let things get out of the overall humidity in the house. So it's a combination of understanding your climate and putting building controls in place that are going to move the air the appropriate way, and then potentially introducing dehumidification devices in your basement, in your crawl space, attached to your air conditioning system. You can put dehumidifiers as well that can help manage that.
Would you recommend putting a dehumidifier, I guess, on every floor, even in the somehow reaching the attic?
I immediately say to do that. I think it's important to understand what the humidity levels are throughout the house. So part of what we do is that we're doing relative humidity readings as we're going through the house. If we're seeing that the attic is 65, 70%, we're like, okay, there's something going on up here. Is it because exhaust in a bathroom is pushing air up here? Is it so let's try to figure out why the humidity is where it is. If it's determined that it's just kind of because of where we live and the natural building pressure that's moving air up there, then yeah, you can start looking at dehumidification options that can be placed up there.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And what do you usually find? Is summer worse for mold, or is like winter worse when it's extremely cold outside and then the house has a lot of heating?
So it's an interesting question. There's kind of 2 answers to that. The first is most mold problems happen because of issues inside your house. Inside your house is temperature controlled. So it doesn't really matter what time of year it is when you're talking about I have a leak under a sink or I have something that's going on. If there's a moisture issue, mold is going to happen into what it's like outside. The one thing that I will say where the external temperature we start noticing some trends is in colder weather climates, you're not using your heater, you start using your heater. Sorry, I got confused. When it gets colder. And so what'll happen a lot is, the summer will pass and all of a sudden it gets cold. And so people are turning on their heaters. And what's happened is that the dust buildup and the microbial buildup within the HVAC systems has been accumulating maybe over months. And then when they turn the heater on, it burns off all the dust. And the dust is what's carrying all the contaminants. People start reacting. We do get a lot of calls around the colder months, especially from like Midwest, East Coast, because all of a sudden people are starting to notice problems. And really what's happening is that there's just been an accumulation in your heating system. And then when you turn it on, you're burning it off. And now it's working its way through much at a higher concentrated level and faster throughout the house. So we do see that in terms of trends for time of year.
That's very interesting. Lots of interesting information. In terms of, I guess if someone just sees like mold in their windowsill, could they just clean it themselves, or why would mold keep developing inside a window that, for example, they might not even open?
Yeah. So, if you want to clean it the first time yourself, you can do that. And you can use, just don't use bleach. to clean it. It's my one PSA for this entire thing. Don't use bleach to clean mold. It's bad. So
I saw you post about that.
Other than that, though, you could try that on a window, eye on it, though, and see if it comes back. If it's coming back, there's likely some sort of issue with the seal of the window. So it's not properly sealing the temperature changes from outside to inside, and it's probably creating a form of condensation around where the window meets the, like the metal encasing, or even like where if it's an older house, there might be wood sills or something around it. And if that's happening, then it's actually a window issue that's occurring, and so it's going to continue to happen. And oftentimes, if that's the issue, you can actually end up having mold that starts impacting beyond the window, like the studs that surround the window and even below the window. So that whole enclosure where your window is kind of put into. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Could be a sign that there's an actual window issue for sealing out the differences in temperature and creating that condensation.
That's really interesting. So if someone was to start working on, I guess, the mold in their body, do you have recommendations for that after they've contacted someone like you?
So that's definitely not my area of expertise. What I would say is the first thing, I would look and I would grab a book called Break the Mold by Dr. Jill Krista. She's a good friend of mine, and she wrote this book, and it's an amazing primer for how to essentially understand what mold and mycotoxins are doing to your body, and then a lot of things that you can do to counteract that. So I would go baseline knowledge, read that book, and get a feel for the different types of foods, the different types of exposures, all the different things that you can do to help, start kind of treating that. Otherwise, I would, in addition to that, be looking for an integrative or functional medicine doctor near your area that specializes in mold. And there are a lot of them. It's just, might be hard to find them. In Mold Masterclass, which is the online training course that I actually have a list of hundreds and hundreds of doctors throughout the country as a referral kind of list for people to look at. So understanding, getting a mold literate doctor, super important. But that book, Break the Mold, is a great starting point to understand the things that you can do.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Was there anything else you wanted to add that we might have missed talking about, or that you feel might be helpful for the eczema community to know about?
I think rehashing something I mentioned earlier, I think really trying to on if you're seeing reactions at a certain time, like trying to really kind of take stock of you and what you're doing and what might be going on with your body while that's happening. I think it's important. I think a lot of times, a lot of us, me included, everybody, we just kind of live our lives. We're in our routines. We're feeling however we're feeling, and we're not really looking at it under the scope of, okay, what am I doing that could be triggering this? And so, like I mentioned, for me, I've started putting the correlation to when I do multiple inspections back to back, I start seeing like flare-ups like that. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing is, if you do spend time away from your house, try to think about. It's a big indicator of something that could be going on. So I think just trying to be a little more aware of yourself and what your body is doing and when it's doing it is a big thing. We obviously are not functional medicine doctors, but that is kind of the scope and the lens that they look at you under. They try to understand how do different things work with causes it to do certain things, so they can start to try to figure out how to treat those things. And so if we look at ourselves, the much lesser trained version of that lens, we could at least try to put some correlations together. And I think it's a good step to try to get a feel for what your body does in certain situations.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you mentioned to look at the history of the home, because, I was following someone who was looking for a new house, and they could just sense the mold that was in there when they went to look at new houses, and so, that's kind of important to look at too. And I also heard that new houses can even harbor mold more easily because they might not have good ventilation systems compared to old homes.
Yeah. Every house has its strengths and its weaknesses. So there's not There's not like the perfect storm of we're going to get this place and it's going to be great. Older homes have their challenges. The older a home is, the longer its history has been, the more little leaks and things have happened, the more maybe floods that have happened. And if that house is 50, 60, 70 years old, it's probably had multiple owners. That history dies as the owner leaves, right? Because you don't know what happened before you. So you're dealing with a lot in older homes that are unknown, plus whatever you do know that's happened while you were there. Mm-hmm. In newer houses, there can be issues too. There could be when they're installing the toilet floods, and they just try to do it as quick as they can and put it all together, and then you don't know about that. I've done inspections on brand new houses where the air conditioning systems were completely contaminated. And it's because during the air conditioning systems to test them and to try to make sure that they're working. But in the meantime, they're doing all this disruption with the construction and putting a bunch of stuff in there. And then all of a sudden it ended up contaminated. And telling someone in a brand new house that you have to replace your air conditioning systems because they're beyond the point of return at that point when they haven't even moved in yet is a tough thing too. So
that's so disappointing. That's very hard.
Yeah. And then outside of that, the exterior, what's going on outside of your house is so important too. Drainage, heating of a house, how you're directing water away from the roof, and if you have planters, all these different things by the house. External water impacts the house very easily. And so if you don't have the proper drainage solution in place, you're actually putting any house, old or new, at a higher risk for water to start impacting it in a lesser amount of time. So that's another big piece of the equation too.
Do you have any water leak detectors that you would recommend, especially for under the sinks?
Not a specific one. I know that there are units that you could put under there and they'll trigger whenever there's like I don't know if it's a humidity level that hits or if it actually just feels water. But honestly, that idea is amazing because most people don't look under their sinks ever. So if you have something like that under there, especially under your sinks, by your dishwasher, by your water heater, anywhere where there are active water sources going on that can act as your eyes and ears when you're not paying attention to it, I mean, that's amazing stuff. The faster or the more likely you're going to be able to avoid a bigger problem.
And I also just want to emphasize that even when the mold is cleared up, or if a person leaves the home, the spores can still be inside the person, and it can also travel with the belongings. And so they can still be contaminated with mold even after they leave a place or they remediate a place.
Absolutely. And there's two pieces of that. From your contents and belongings, so, talking environment, there's different testing we do in the house, not only to identify where the source of the problem is located. That's important. Is it in a wall? Is it in a ceiling? Because you have to remove the source. That's like the factory creating the it's coming from. But if you think of a factory and you drive by one, smoke comes out the top, right? So they're making whatever they're making. Smoke is the byproduct. The same concept holds true with mold. And so if we think of it that way, the mold colonies are releasing spores and fragments and potentially toxins off the colony. That's now in our air and it's moving through, and it will settle on our belongings and our contents. And so there's different types of testing we do throughout the living spaces of the house using dust testing methods that will let us understand the load of mold, if there's mycotoxins, if there are bacterial toxins present in the house. If they are there in the living spaces like that, that means it's settling on all your belongings. Then we have a conversation about, okay, based on the data that we got out of those test results, what do we think needs to be done with your belongings? Are there certain things that we don't think can be salvaged, or there are things that we think can be cleaned? So it's a really big step of the process, and you're 100% right. If you leave a moldy house and go somewhere else, but you bring all your stuff with you, you're probably still going to be bringing contamination with you too. The other piece about the body, that's where the doctors and the protocols tell you that if you are being exposed in your house, that their treatment protocols are only going to work a limited amount. You have to remove the ongoing environmental exposure so the treatments and the modalities that they put you on are effective and they don't get constantly beat down by the environment, and eventually your body can only hold that off so much. So they'll always say, fix the environment or get out of the environment first. Once we do that, the treatments that we're going to do for you, whether they're IV or whatever it is that they have doing for you, they're going to start to take a hold. It might take some time, but at least you're on the path to being able to start eliminating that stuff. So you're right on point with both of those.
And I just feel so bad when I read a lot of Facebook group forums when people said that they didn't have enough money to leave the house and sell it and remediate everything and then buy a new house because of the closing fees and the renovations that they had to do. So they were stuck. And yeah, I saw that, if you buy a house where they don't disclose that there's mold, you can, the house owner can also be sued. So it can be really sad for some people when they aren't able to leave the space that they're in. And it's just really heartbreaking.
It is. It's one of the things that like hits me the hardest doing what we do. And it's really why I want to try to create an education platform that's really expansive for people. Because a lot of people, especially in the Facebook groups, I'm in a lot of them too. And a lot of people are looking and trying to find any information they can. The problem is a lot of the information that's getting isn't correct. Who's giving you that information? How do they know? What's the research that they're referring to? All that stuff. And the thing with the internet, the great thing and the bad thing about the internet is that anyone can give their opinion. And so, having a source of information that is coming from a place of expertise and working with people like you is so, so, so important. And that's actually why I started to pull myself out of interacting every fit in the mold and Facebook groups and actually creating Mold Masterclass in the first place. I was like, okay, it's to have a bigger impact. I need to be able to create one source where people can go to and get the information versus trying to like answer everybody one-on-one and then compete with somebody else who's in the mold group who, says, oh, well, that's not how you do it. And now what does that person do? They don't know, there's so many pieces of information. So it's a lot to take in. It's overwhelming. Like I said earlier, got to take things one step at a time. Try to bring our kind of mental focus back to the now and what the next step is, and avoid that future pacing of stress that hasn't even happened yet. If we could do that, at least we're maintain as much of our cognitive function as we can and focus on what we can.
Yeah, definitely. Now, do you do remote only in the States or also Canada and States and other places?
Right now, we're only in the States. We've gotten a lot of calls to try to travel up to Canada. There's just some things that we would have to work out, from the logistical standpoint to be able to make that happen. It's something we're thinking about. Is probably not on the near radar to make that happen. There is, however, a secondary service that we're working on creating to allow, it's going to be more of a guided do-it-yourself version of what we do, where we basically guide you on all the pictures in every single room, everything that we would need to see. And it will be submitted to us, and then we'll actually review everything and through photographs that the client would take for us directly. We'd have video series directly on how to do all of it. It's going to be a very kind of expansive platform as a way to try to service people that can't necessarily there. So we're trying to think of options to help everyone. And the testing and the inspections, there's an expense to it. And I think, people understand that. If there's options that we can provide that might be able to mitigate that a little bit, that's what we're trying to do. So by creating a training course, by creating a secondary service that kind of is more of a teamwork effort between the client and us versus us sending our guy out there. There's things we're trying to put together this year, as well as a larger education platform that I think is going to be helpful for a lot of these people. So there's a lot of exciting things happening, and we just got to start pumping them out.
Definitely. So maybe you can also send me your link to your Mold Masterclass, and I'll include it in the description so that people can find it. Yeah. Any last words for people who are listening?
Thanks for listening to me talk for an hour. I think that's the big one. Hopefully it wasn't too boring.
No, it was interesting. So much great information. Thank you.
Good. No, I'm so happy that you had me on. I don't know if you I love talking about this stuff. I could talk for hours. So.
Yeah. And if people want to contact you or find out more information about you, where can they find you?
Yeah. So on Instagram, you can find me at Mold Masterclass. That's basically like the social platform that I'm using to expand on the Mold Masterclass teaching platform. So that's a great place to reach me directly. My company and it's at Mold Masterclass. My inspection company is called We Inspect. So yesweinspect.com is the way to reach us there. And that's actually where we would be doing inspections and flying our consultants out and kind of doing the tandem. Personally, I'm still overseeing every single inspection that's done throughout the company that way. So there's a couple ways to reach us there, and hopefully we could figure out a way to help anyone that needs it.
Yeah, I think that you guys are doing something amazing.
Really, really appreciate that. I'm very passionate about it, and I want to be able to make as big of a difference as we can and help as many people as we can. So we're working towards that goal.
So I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing, and thank you for sharing all of the information that you did today and that you're doing for the community.
Thanks for indulging me, and I hope everyone is able to take something beneficial out of this.
Thanks for listening to the Eczema Podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass it along to your friends. Visit eczemaconquerors.com for more articles and tips. Thanks for listening.